One of the things I'm very interested in relation to Irish harp repertoire is lever changing, but also chromatic colour and harmonic and musical language. Very often students coming up through the system playing Irish harp repertoire don't get access to the same kinds of musical languages that, say, a pianist would encounter or somebody who plays an orchestral instrument. So the whole journey of harmonic development, particularly across the 1900s, kind of bypasses Irish harp players. They wind up with a lot of folk music, some early music, some transcriptions or arrangements of Baroque, and pretty much a gap in between. And then, of course, there are lots of possibilities with, pop, rock, folk as well. But in classical terms, there are gaps in what they'll encounter. So what I was seeking to do with Chromatétude was, well, write one small piece, which might go towards that gap anyhow as a start. And a point of inspiration was the Prometheus chord of Scriabin, which uses every possible fourth, the augmented, the diminished, the augmented, and two perfect fourths at the top. One of the things I wanted to do was make this musical language more accessible to players so that they weren't loaded with a heavy workload of lever changing and a whole lot of dense changes to cope with, as well as a musical language which might be new to them. So I deliberately set out to write a piece with no lever changes whatsoever, and to set up a very interesting combination of pitches at the very beginning of the piece, and that set then stays for the duration. The set of pitches that I devised for the piece allows for all 12 transpositions of the Prometheus chord. So that again would give much greater colour and would increase the scope for some 12-note writing as well. The piece has basically 4 sections. The first one is quite a free introduction. There are 1 or 2 features in it, like harmonics at the 12th. A good example of this then would be in bar 17. So that's another way of getting extra pitches without changing levers. Normally the harmonic is at the octave. So if you do it at the 12th, then you have an octave and a fifth, obviously above the original pitch. But that harmonic pitch might not be available on the open string, depending on your lever setting. So it was another way of getting more pitches available. A little later in this free introduction, there are more chromatic ideas, again where harmonics are very, very useful in giving us pitches that wouldn't be available on the open strings, and that's especially at bars 19 and 20. So after the introduction, the next section is built on a formula, really. It's spelling out the words Fiant Leas Erin Grit Le Dennis Hempson, which simply is the name of Dennis Hempson's short little piece, Fiant Leas. And Dennis Hempson was a harper at the 1792 Harp Festival. He was the oldest harper there, the only one still playing with nails, and he had this little piece, Fiant Leas. It was a little kind of a tester thing to see if your harp was in tune. So I've used that piece as a resource. It's from the Bunting collection. After our introduction, the next section, if you like, bars 24 to 37, are a matching up of the 6 notes of the Prometheus chord with the 6 braille dots in braille letters. So I used the pattern of dots for each letter in the phrase Fiant Leas Erin Grit Le Dennis Hempson. Use that pattern to select notes from each of the 12 transpositions of the Prometheus chord. So it was very logical at the time, but when you try to explain it, it sounds a bit convoluted. But it wound up in giving me this lovely sort of, groundless 12-note sense, I think, that you get in serialist writing. That then is prior to a paraphrase of Fiant Leas itself, where anybody who knows the piece of Fiant Leas, they would recognise the contours and shapes and the arpeggio patterns from the original, here being transferred into something of a paraphrase. And so that third section takes us from bar 38 to bar 53. Again, there's the odd bit of use of harmonics at the 12th. We have those bar 48, 51 and 52, again slightly enlarging the pitch palette. And having had our statement of Fie and Lace, we're now brought into the final section of the piece, which is quite climactic. The textures get a little bigger towards the end. And the main resource for this final section from bar 54 to the end is Scriabin's Prometheus chord and its 12 transpositions. I'm also a bit of a sucker for Sloninsky's Thesaurus of Scales and Chords. And in there, of course, there's the quartal chord, which shows how all 12 pitches can be used in a single quartal chord. So it's not possible physically, when you've only 4 fingers on each hand, you know, the max you're going to get would be 10 notes, even if you add a slide. So generally 4 notes per hand. So what I did in bars 64 to 65 was to show that 12-note quartal chord just simply across 2 chords on either side of that bar line at the beginning of bar 65. I've been involved in the design of the Irish harp, and there's always an ongoing debate of should the range be bigger or should it be smaller. So in writing a piece with no lever changes whatsoever, I also wrote a piece with a very slightly reduced range from my own one, again so that somebody playing any brand of lever harp, that it will be feasible on their instrument and they won't run out of notes. So that was another, just a parameter I took upon myself to perhaps help the feasibility, that somebody might feel, well, look, I can do this, and you know, I've all the notes on my harp, rather than the frustration of having a piece in front of you and then you don't have enough strings in your harp. There's nothing worse.